Hey Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mari. How are you today?
Good, good. So we need to talk about Netanyahu, man. I'm not sure, is it 4, 5, or 6 fingers? I'm struggling.
Why would you do this to me?
Figure it out.
I'm pretty sure he's got 5. I think he's got 5 like everybody else. And yeah, I've stared at his hands more than I want to out of anybody else's hands on this planet, unfortunately. But yeah.
So that was like a lighthearted part of the weekend. The more concerning part is the Gulf is still getting struck. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. And Trump's trying to get other nations involved. I remember I was doing an interview as he was, as he posted that request, and my interviewee was saying, Mario, like, is he losing his mind? That doesn't make any sense. But and Trump has a habit of like asking for a lot and then settling for something less. I want Greenland to be part of the US, and they accept some deal that gives them more access to the country. Now, in this case, I think it's the same strategy again. And based on the developments, he's saying, hasn't been confirmed by other countries. He's saying countries are going to join him. Some like it, some don't. And he's trying to strong arm them into helping the US open the Strait of Hormuz. So first, initial reaction to this, how significant is this? Do you agree with Trump's strategy when it comes to the Straits? And why would he involve other countries to open it up if the US Navy can't?
Well, I mean, they're all kind of involved, right? Like everybody's being affected by this being shut down. Oil prices are steadily beginning to climb again, right? I believe I actually saw that Starmer came out and he said that UK was going to pitch in and start helping over there as well. But why is this significant and how did it end up happening? So what I ended up seeing online that what came out was actual videos of what appeared to be folks from the IRGC that had removed their uniforms. And this was being reported inside of the cities, but also more important, in my opinion, over inside of the Gulf, over inside the Persian Gulf. Some of the first oil tankers that I saw getting set on fire all had damage down to the bottom of the vessels, right? Like big damage down to the bottom of the vessels. And we're wondering, okay, so is this mines that are actually hitting these? And then we ended up seeing a video that came out of a couple guys on a speedboat that were out there. And what it appears to be is that they're letting out unmanned surface vessels. And those unmanned surface vessels are what's ramming in and exploding on the boats, kind of like what we see with Russia and Ukraine. Right?
Like sea drones.
Correct. Sea drones. That's right. With explosives ramming into the bottom of the boats. So those are much harder to go after. It's one thing to target warships. United States of America has destroyed over 100, I think is the latest number that came out, Iranian warships, taken out over 100 of them. But it's another thing when you have civilian vessels that are cruising around that are launching these drones, or they're being launched from certain places, which is rumored to be from Cog Island. Also over on Cog Island, they're supposed to have all of their sea-based mines that they could go out and they could launch and set out there. So that was part of the reason, or so so we were told that the U.S. ended up bombing that infrastructure over there was to take those out.
Now, in terms of Starmer, I don't think he said he'll join. I think the US, he hasn't rejected, but there's reports that it will reject. He's been a bit vague with his response. I might have missed the latest news. Carney's, I think he's been pretty vocal that they're not going to be involved. I'm not sure about Japan. Japan depends heavily on the Strait of Hormuz. But again, I'm trying to understand why Trump would want to drag them in. Is that because he believes Iran would not strike Japanese warships, or I don't know how China would be involved? Because I think there's also a report that Iran let through one vessel that is paying for the oil with Chinese yuan. Right. So that's a hell of a strategy, a hell of an FU to Trump.
So that's the crazy part when we start talking about the oil, right? So what I read over the weekend was that Iran had proposed that they were willing to open back up the Strait of Hormuz and they wouldn't target any vessels. But guess what? All the oil had to be traded in Chinese currency. So why would they do that, right? And this goes back to what I talked to you about last time on how Iran and China are kind of in bed with one another. And it also signals to me, at least, that the UAE is actually doing those proper sanctions on the monetary systems that's actually affecting Iran. And so it's actually helping them out by going over to China, because China is getting what we talked about last time, 40% of their oil from the Strait. And so when you're restricting 40% of the oil from the Strait of Hormuz, China is suffering drastically bad. It's going to impact industry and everything else. So I think China has their fingers in this quite a bit. But do you remember Signalgate when the U.S., like after Trump got in office, we were already bombing them, but then we moved to another strike carrier group and it got heavy, right? The U.S. was heavy bombing. And during Signalgate over for the Red Sea, I believe it was J.D. Vance, the vice president of the United States, had said, I hope the UK realizes what a large deal or big favor we're doing to the UK, or words to that effect, to the EU. So he was calling them out back then that by us doing that, we're trying to reopen the Red Sea and get commerce flowing through, because that affected the GDP of the EU significantly. And that's a number that nobody's even bothered reporting on. I try to do like loose figures, on that sucker, and it's very hard to get, but you're talking to the neighbor of like $500 billion plus worth of like GDP from the EU that got sucked out of there while it was closed down for a year. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I mean, this time is different because the EU and those countries blame the US for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, sure.
For them, they're a bit pissed off. They're like, hey, you started this war. You didn't even consult us before starting this war, and now you want us to come clean up your mess. This is the mindset, but I'm not sure how far this will go and whether Trump could strong arm them. Also, I don't know how impactful China's strategy of letting any ship, so they announced it, and apparently they've let one cargo ship through, one oil tanker through that was paying in Chinese yuan. So all these transactions, the majority of these transactions for oil that comes out of the Gulf, is paid through US dollars, petrodollar. That's what allows the US dollar, the US hegemony in the world. Now, Iran's always been a threat to this. There's even an interview that Tucker did with some economist or some lady that talked about that being the main reason that, or the main reason that Trump started this war is because Iran was standing in the way of the American financial system, of the petrodollar, which is what makes America America. Now, so Iran doing this, it's kind of them doubling down on the strategy of weakening US hegemony and the US dollar. I think they're doing it as another way to, pressure Trump to stop the war. But could it work? And then what is the incentive for China to help Trump open the Strait of Hormuz? And also other countries like Japan, won't they have it? So India can buy more oil from Russia, oil and gas, I think. So Trump has opened that up. There was initially sanctions where India was not allowed to buy from Russia in order to pressure Russia in the Ukraine war. Well, he's allowed them, he's given them a 30-day amnesty for that. Now, but when it comes to South Korea, Japan, which are screwed right now, and obviously China, why help open up the Strait of Hormuz militarily when they can just buy the oil through the Chinese yuan? Not sure if they'll accept doing that and what the repercussions would be. But I just don't know how effective Trump's strategy to strong arm those countries to opening up the strait would be.
So you remember how we talked about last time? We talked about how Iran and Russia were working on a monetary system that was not going to be able to get touched by the West. So if we wanted to impose sanctions on Iran or Russia, that they wouldn't be able to touch it. And when we ended up going after Iran, and now we're looking at ripping the regime out, they kind of like lose that monetary system. Well, it was said that system that they were working on was then going to be used for the entirety of this BRICS currency that is in development that's going to be coming out. And if all of the nations ended up jumping on that, it would make and said that we're no longer using the petrodollar, we're going to use a BRICS currency. Like now you have to use the BRICS currency in order to do the petrodollar, like get rid of the petrodollar, BRICS currency from now on. That's what's going to be running oil. That would have a huge impact on the United States. Well, China had a huge blow when we took out Maduro because the IRGC was shipping over Venezuelan oil up to China in order to pay Maduro back. And then they were getting kickbacks for money for the IRGC. That's kind of how they were getting their payments for the ballistic missile program, their nuclear research and everything. So now China, they're hurting because they printed off a ton of money to pay Maduro. And so they've got to find a way to kind of like, slow that inflation down a little bit from printing all of that money off. The United States made that mistake, back during COVID and afterwards, and we had inflation that was just running out of control. And some say it still is. But if China wants to kind of start combating that and actually wants to be friendly towards the West, this could be a negotiation tactic. Trump might actually be able to use that as a negotiation tactic with China to try to free up some of the precious metals or something like that, that you and I had talked about last time.
Yeah, exactly. We could start seeing the ROI on the US controlling the Strait of Hormuz, assuming they do, we could start seeing the ROI pretty soon as Trump uses that as a negotiation in his meeting with President Xi later this month. I'm not sure if that meeting's been canceled, but there'll be many meetings. Now, another question I want to get your thoughts on is the idea of boots on the ground. We haven't spoken about it yet, and potentially invading and seizing the island, the Karg Island. So that island controls the majority of the oil refining and export from Iran, about 90-something%. So Trump has been pretty vocal about not bombing the oil infrastructure there.
Right.
And that could be either to avoid Iranian retaliation, number one. Number two is to ensure oil prices do not skyrocket even more. Or number three is when they seize it, Trump controls the oil pipelines there and the refining that happens there. So do you think, from the people you've spoken to and the research you've done, how feasible is it for US to be able to invade and seize Karg Island? Because for me, it just sounds very very dangerous because now you're much closer to Iranian territory, much closer to not only missiles and drones, but also to their artillery as well. They could fire from Iran onto the island. And what air defense systems could you put on the island? I'm sure how easy it is to ship the THAAD systems, etc. And also, you got to go back a step. How do you even get the troops and the equipment onto the island? Is it through Chinooks and other helicopters and parachuting through planes, or is it going to be through the sea? And if it's going to be through the sea, wouldn't they become sitting ducks for the Iranians, as the Navy's already warned? And if it's through the air, isn't it pretty dangerous because the drones and the Iranian air defense systems, maybe they've got an S-300 nearby or they move it nearby, could strike those planes. It just seems very, very dangerous. Would love to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, airfield seizures, all of that's always very dangerous, or conducting amphibious assaults is always going to be very dangerous. Airborne operations always going to be dangerous. Looking at it, I don't think that's what the U.S. plans on doing. All of this started with, I want to say it was the 31st MEU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, coming out, reportedly about 2,500 Marines that are, on deployment heading over to CENTCOM, that CENTCOM had requested them. The one important thing that people miss about the Marine Expeditionary Unit that's being deployed is it's got what's called SOC, or Special Operations Capable. It is capable of being attached to a SOCOM unit to conduct operations. Now, they're not going to use the MEU, right, to go over and conduct special operations itself. It's going to be in order to assist, and help out special operations. So I actually think what we're seeing for that deployment going over there is more of a quick reactionary force, or having additional, Marines that would be on the ground to help secure the area in the event that they need to go in and look for any of the enriched uranium. I also think that there's probably some centrifuges that are deep below the ground that the U.S. doesn't want to admit that we weren't able to destroy, that need to be taken out. And so by putting boots on the ground over at those facilities, you would have those Marines acting as a cordon element, isolating that objective, and then going in and demoing everything that's underground that we can't reach with our bombs. Now, the only reason I say that is because, as we talked about before, you had the Iranian foreign minister that's told Steve Witkoff that they had, 460 kilograms, which is an additional 20 kilograms on top of the 440 that the IAEA stated back in June, right? But we also had the foreign minister come out in an interview. I'm trying to remember what channel I saw him on, that confirmed again they're still holding on to a lot of enriched uranium. Yeah. And so if they still have that 60+% enriched uranium and we want to get rid of it, putting boots on the ground is the logical answer for going in and getting it. Now, it's different than invading a country. You're talking about a raid, right? So a raid is nothing more than basically an assault on objective with a planned withdrawal, right? So I plan on going in and then I plan on leaving. Like, I'm not staying there. And when you're talking about special operations troops that have volunteered numerous times throughout their military career, the professionals, this is what they do. A lot of guys know about, like Green Berets conducting unconventional warfare, guerrilla warfare, know about Navy SEALs doing direct action raids. But the one thing that most people don't realize is that one of the core tenets, one of the core things that like soft units train for, is counter-proliferation. And so that is very much a mission set for them to be capable of doing. And I wouldn't put it past them to have, a heavy presence of Marines on standby in case need be, in order to take those out.
How dangerous would an operation like this be?
It depends on the intel, right? So intel drives operations, Mario. So intel is always going to drive the operations. So it depends on how good the intelligence is. It depends on what we assess, the units in that area to be capable of, what their composition, disposition is, how close their nearest friendly units are, whether or not they have communications between them. Things of that nature, how long they got to be on the objective, whether or not they're going to be able to like breach and enter it, all of those things. If they did go to Cog Island, though, like I'll entertain that fantasy for a minute that we're going to go secure Cog Island for some reason, which we can do from the air. We don't have to do that from the ground, right? Putting boots on the ground on Cog Island would be symbolic, but it would be stupid in my opinion. You've got, like you said, short range ballistic missiles and artillery, right? We've talked a lot about their medium range ballistic missiles, how many they've been launching, but the short range ones would absolutely be able to pound that place.
The medium range are the ones fired at the Gulf, yeah?
Well, medium, short, yeah. You've got the capability to go both ways. Like when you're talking about down to when you're talking about Cog Island, you can use either. Down on that
the Cog Island, you can use short ones, but for the medium ones they use, the long ones they use towards Israel, the medium ones they use towards Gulf, and you're saying towards Cog Island they use medium as well as short range ones, which may not be able to reach some of the Gulf countries.
That's what I'm saying. So we've been talking about their medium range ballistic missiles a lot, saying that, listen, we've seen like a 95% reduction. but there really hasn't been a lot of like reporting or instances of those short range ones that are going out, right? And so the deal is when those Marines would take that beach, they're sitting ducks, they're flapping in the wind. We've got abilities to take them out, but as we've seen across the Gulf and as we've seen across the Middle East, those systems have limitations and they're not perfect. So when you start talking about the Shahed drones that are going over there, the 136s, I was reading this morning that they actually have and have been using an upgraded Russian version that they were using on Ukraine. And it was Zelensky that came out and said that, listen, those components, these variations that you're seeing, those are actually the Russian variations. So it's not just the Iranian ones, it's also the Russian ones. Plus you've got short range ballistic missiles, like you said, artillery, all of those things that they have to worry about. And you're essentially sitting out in the open. A lot of troops from the global war on terror will sit back and they'll be like, incoming indirect fire, it's not such a big deal. Well, it's fine when you're sitting on a base, and you've got like a concrete bunker, you've got a warning siren that's coming off, you've got all these aerial defense assets that are in place. But when you're actually out there with your butt in the wind and you're being bracketed, right? When you've got rounds that are falling in front, then behind, and that's getting closer and closer to you, it's a bit of a problem. Right. There's no protection for those Marines, like once they end up hitting that beachhead. So for that reason alone, I would think it would be kind of crazy to have them go out and take it unless those assets are severely diminished. I just don't think that I don't think we've focused our concentration on those yet. But again, I don't have access to the intel. And I would also say, what would the objective be? Like, why would we need to put boots on the ground on Cog Island when we can isolate it from the air? If that's in fact what I stated earlier was true, which is this is where those unmanned surface vessels are coming from. This is where some of the IRGC assets are actually pouring out from to go do operations in civilian clothing to harass merchant vessels. Why can't we just isolate that from the air? Why would we have to put boots on the ground? And I'm not quite sure of a good reason why you would need to do that. So I would see them more or less as a backup to like U.S. Army Delta Force CAG, or either some special operations unit that would go in there and get them, to provide additional firepower.
Another thing I want to get your thoughts on is you talked about the attacks that we're still seeing on the Gulf. The amount of attacks have dropped significantly, but they're still there, including missiles, not only drones. Is that expected from Iran, or does that show their capabilities to continue striking despite the 2,000, 3,000 targets that were struck by Israel and the US? And could that be a military win for Iran? Would you say that exceeded expectations?
No, I think everybody kind of expected it, which is why we saw that whole buildup going over there. And like I said, none of the systems are perfect with the depletion. And if I asked you, like, Mario, could you name an impact that Iran has been able to strike on the Gulf that is of strategic importance?
Fujairah in Dubai, that was struck today and yesterday.
So we're talking about oil, right? So going after
and the airports as well have been struck in Kuwait and Dubai.
Sure. So when I say strategic impact, I mean something that's going to shift this war into the IRG's favor. Like what is it what targets have they taken out that's going to shift this into their favor? That puts a hurting on the global economy. But as far as what Iran's been actually capable of doing, of changing the direction of the war, having strategic impacts and targets, I would say maybe shutting down the Strait of Hormuz and having that happen. But other than that, taking out the oil, it's making people angry, but it's not going to change what the USA is actually doing when it comes down to Iran. It's not really giving them like any leverage. When it comes down there, I would actually say that striking
Fujairah, for example, boosts oil prices. Fujairah as an alternative to the Strait of Hormuz. But even if it's not a win when it comes to their objective in the war, it could be a win by pressuring Gulf countries to pressure Trump. Not that this is working. I don't know if Gulf countries now are pissed at Trump, or that kind of flipped after Iran attacked them for so long, that flipped and now being pissed at Iran instead and turning on Iran instead of turning on Trump. That's a different discussion.
Oh, we're seeing both. We're seeing both.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing both. It's pissing off the world, and it's pissing off some of the Gulf states as well, like towards Iran. So,
but do you think from a military perspective, you don't think that's an achievement by Iran to be able to continue striking Israel on a daily basis, even though less extensive than the beginning, while continuing to strike their Gulf neighbors? Do you think that the US and Israel expected Iran to continue being able to strike the Gulf? Because Trump made comments before, a few days ago, that Iran is stopping. They don't have the capabilities to strike the Gulf anymore. He made an off the cuff remark. Obviously, that was many days ago, and they continue to do so. From a military perspective, would you consider that a bit of a win for Iran, or no? Not that.
No, I mean, it makes for good public relations, right? For the people that are rooting for Iran, it makes for good relations for them. But militarily speaking, looking at it, which is what I tend to do here, right? Militarily speaking, it doesn't really change the battlefield at all. It adds political pressure it most certainly adds political pressure. But, like we just said, we are seeing Gulf states that are getting ticked off at Iran. And we're also seeing them that are getting upset with America. We're also seeing the EU that's upset with America. So there's pluses and minuses that go in there. Trump speaking off the cuff, man. I don't know why he does it. Like they should just tell him to stop, because every time he has, a live speech, he always says something dumb that people then take and they use it for, propaganda and everything, and are just pushing out, well, he said, like, yeah, I got it. But let's talk about the real impacts and what it's actually changing.
What about the rumors? So obviously Netanyahu doesn't have 6 fingers and he's alive, but there's rumors about one of them is the new supreme leader being gay. I'm going to dismiss those. Came from the New York Post.
I'm done with that one. Yeah.
So I'm dismissing that one. There's another one. I asked the IDF spokesman about it, but he said he doesn't have any intel on this. But one where the supreme leader is in Russia. I think that will be, if it's true, it could be a problem for the US because now he's in a territory where the US cannot and Israel cannot assassinate him. And assassinating the new supreme leader is pretty necessary to be able to bring down the regime. Because if you can't take down the new supreme leader, Khamenei, it's going to be hard to force regime change or even to get the IRGC to put down their weapons. So I want to get your thoughts on that, but also reports that there's defections, but more importantly, that there's chaos in the decision-making. I think, again, Trump himself said it, but it's chaos in the decision-making within the IRGC. There's some that do want to make a deal, and Trump said that he's having discussions behind the scenes. Iranians say no. Trump says yes. Trump saying he's not accepting a deal yet. Some want a deal. Others want to continue fighting and want to avenge the former supreme leader. So on these two theories, the theory or both theories, where do you stand?
So Guardian was able to confirm via the Iranian ambassador to Cyprus. Iranian ambassador to Cyprus said, yes, that we had heard he had been wounded. And yes, it was not just in his leg, but also in his arm and in his hand. And that he was being treated inside of a hospital. Newspaper in Kuwait is the one that actually got the information that he had been flown out to Moscow. Interesting part about the entire thing is he was wounded, according to the ambassador to Cyprus. He was wounded on February 28th. And so if he was wounded on February 28th, according to the Iranian ambassador over in Cyprus, he confirms that to the Guardian. Then the question is, who's actually running the country? Because if he's been hospitalized since then, now we've got to ask who has been running the country. That Kuwaiti paper didn't get much traction. I've got the source up over here. I'd have to grab it for you. But the Kuwaiti paper ended up not getting very much traction about it at all. And so I could easily see like dissent that ends up coming, within the ranks on that, because if he's not actually the one that's making the calls, if he's not the one that's actually giving the information, then who is? And that would easily provide some sort of a divide. And I'm like you, I dismissed the whole gay thing that ended up coming up about him. But I think it's another example of like, either dis and or misinformation that's coming out. And I think even if the rumors, about him being in Moscow aren't true, and let's say he's there in Kuwait, we do know he's wounded, but that amount of information, let's say he's not in Moscow, let's say he's still in Iran, let's say they flew him out to Mashhad, far away from Tehran. If he's still rumored and that information is getting passed around, that could also, basically upset a lot of people, that he's wounded and he's flown out of the country and that he's no longer there, almost like abandoning people. The big story for the IRGC was that the reason the previous supreme leader community ended up getting killed was because he was there in Tehran with the people. He's not hiding in bunkers. He's there with
died
the
for
people.
The cause. He thought
that's right.
Someone that mentioned a statement that he said where it's better if he dies for the cause. He's better off dead to support the cause than alive. That's allegedly
right.
A statement that he made, and he didn't mind dying. And I'm not sure whether he was in his bunker or outside his bunker when he was killed. But if he was outside his bunker, maybe that could have some truth to it at a time when everyone expected the US to strike. But based on, is it unusual for the new supreme leader not to give out an audio or video speech whatsoever? Like, if you do give an audio or video speech in like a closed room or in a bunker somewhere, and then send it on, give it to a USB to someone that passes it on to a TV station, is that hard to do? Could that still be traced somehow by Mossad? Because like, is it a genuine reason to give that he's not giving an audio or video speech because Mossad could use that to trace him? Or it's very easy to get around that?
You can get around that. I mean, you can get around it. But the one thing that was very interesting was that I saw reporting about a location that multiple leaders from within the IRGC were using in an underground bunker. And they were able to at least determine that all of these individuals are in the same place. And so you can get intelligence like that off of it, right? And then you can start using human intelligence on the ground to start like gathering more information on where that location might be and kind of get it pinned in. So it can be a little bit more dangerous.
Someone delivers the USB to the TV station, they might find out through intel, through maybe a spy within the
that
TV
was
station,
at this location.
That person delivered it. Then they use the fact that they hacked into all the cameras, where his car came from. That's where the problem comes in.
Yep. Bingo. Yep. So you can start playing those games, right? And you can start figuring those things out. So, it could theoretically be a problem, right? It could. Do I believe that? I don't know. Well, seeing how their ambassador to Cyprus, according to The Guardian, said that he is wounded and hospitalized, it makes me wonder if that's not the case.
On February 20, and that's again on February 28th, at a time when the bunker was obliterated. There was very heavy bombing then, and his family was there, so it wouldn't be too much to speculate that he might have been there or might have been nearby or outside or
so
a car on the way or something.
And I would look at it like I would look at anything else. Like, okay, well, I've got one source that's reporting this. What else do I have to back it up? You know, if it's just this one source that's saying yes, he is wounded. And he is hospitalized. Okay, well, that's been a rumor for a while. So maybe he's just of dissenting opinion and somebody bought him off to be able to say that, right? So what else can I see that's actually coming out on that? Is there any other substantiating reporting? Other substantiating reporting, exactly what you were just talking about, how you've got, rumors of people right now that are defecting, and you've also got, infighting that's taking place from within the regime itself. And so if that's the case, now we start seeing more signs that lean towards it. And then you start going more heavily on the side of, yes, it's more likely than not that he is in fact wounded.
And let's look at the war holistically. Where do you think the States and Israel stand right now? Are they close to achieving their objective? Are things going well for them? There's, two arguments being made, and one of them, they're scrambling to get out of this war. Energy prices are up. Iran is still able to strike Israel and the Gulf. And the regime didn't collapse as everyone would have hoped. There's the other argument saying, no, this was always the plan. This is a regime change operation. There's enough military equipment in the region for a prolonged conflict. And Trump is willing to go all the way to make sure he seizes access to the Strait of Hormuz, no matter what. So it's actually going according to plan. And Iran's military capabilities have been significantly weakened. So these are the two arguments. Where do you stand on that? How well are things going for the U.S.?
I'd present a third argument, to be honest. Yeah, my opinion on this. I think that the U.S. is dealing with Iran not because of Iran itself, but I think we're dealing with it because of the strategic, global importance between Russia and China. And so I think that's why we're also seeing those deals that are coming out right now. Okay, well, we'll give you 30 days. You can sell your oil over there. All right, we'll talk about using the Chinese yuan, for monetary currency, for allowing oil to pass through the strait.
That one could be Iran trying to keep China on their side through these other negotiations?
No, I think the real history of Iran or the future of Iran is going to get decided by Russia and China, and whether or not what we're doing is a big enough blow to their economies and their war effort over inside of Ukraine, for whether or not, the U.S. kind of pulls out early and does a half-assed job versus actually pushes and completes it all the way through. That's my personal take on it. That's what I think. I think depending on how Russia and China respond is how we're going to respond.
Do you think it's going according to plan, better than initially planned, or worse off right now?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say it's going to plan because, I always thought it was about applying pressure to Russia and China, and it's absolutely doing that. It's very clear that it's doing that. And so it's at least troublesome for them to the point where it's catching their attention and we're able to open up more talks and communications.
And the last one I get your thoughts on is there's some talks as well about Iran maybe developing just kind of a very quick, dirty bomb and striking some target with that as a kind of last resort survival strategy. How difficult is it to create a dirty bomb and then ship it to a certain location, through a ship, through road, I don't know, different ways to transport with all the borders, and be able to conduct an operation like this? Is that something that should be concerning, should be talked about?
I think it'd be something that they've already thought about for a long time. And had it up, and those rat lines that they use, call them rat lines, the underground network, you will, that they end up moving them through. That's what makes them so difficult. Let's put it this way: Israel has, I think, undoubtedly very good intelligence, right? Like Mossad does a pretty dang good job. You just got to give credit where credit's due. And yet Hezbollah and Russia and Iran, the IRGC, we're still all coordinating together and moving weapons and equipment down into southern Lebanon, right? Up over to the Israeli border. And that shows you how difficult it is to actually target those particular, movements. And you don't have one guy pick it up in one location and move it all the way to the other location. You have like compartmentalization that's taking place. And you've got one guy that just gets told, hey, you're going to drive this truck over here. And then when you get there, the cargo is going to go to this guy. And that's just kind of what they do, and they continue to do it so that there's not a lot of information that's going out about what it is that's happening. And that makes it even more difficult to target. So you might be able to have good intelligence on one leg of its trip, but not necessarily the entire leg of the entire trip itself.
Is it hard to develop a dirty bomb?
I would to make it effective. Yeah. So like you're talking about radiation and all of that other stuff that's going to end up getting leaked out, from it, right? We're worried about the fallout of all of that crap being spread out in the atmosphere. And so it really goes, it's how do you put the right charge on it to the right, effects, and the delivery system for it is the other question. How are we delivering it? How big does this thing need to be? And how are we going to get it to that location? But the actual effects, really what you're looking at is it's going to have an effect regardless, but how big of an effect is going to depend on how well it's developed to get out, if that makes sense. And seeing how they've had Russia scientists over there, I would think that they'd have the ability to do that, to have a decent effect.
And they've got the enriched uranium.
Right.
Matt, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.